All right, let's talk. Join authors Bill Watkins and Corey Piper as they talk about life, faith, and culture. I know we kind of have a topic that we want to go over today, and I didn't know if we were actually going to, if you really wanted to talk more about the cosmological argument, or if we wanted to steer into the political thing. And I don't know. I'm kind of done with politics right now. The whole Candace Owens insanity, the way there's just this repositioning. It's just drama. And one of the things that I just am so tired of is feeling like there's just drama all the time. I have enough drama in my own life with father-in-law aging and wife having to take care of him. There's just drama in my life.
Sure.
And then to add into the drama politics and worldwide events
Hmm.
and trying to feel like I have to defend that all the time or immerse myself in it, I'm just kind of weary of it. So it's actually been kind of refreshing to go back into the origins of things and reflect on that a little bit.
It's interesting that you bring that up because my wife and I were talking about this the other day too, and I mentioned the same feeling to her that I haven't been following some of the political stories as closely as I was because of all the drama, related to it. And you already know what the different sides are going to say. The opinions don't change. It's just the point of issue that might change. But the viewpoints remain the same. Few people are convincing others. For those who are dyed in the wool on the right or dyed in the wool on the left, nothing's going to change. It's going to be for those in the middle who have a sense that what they've thought about certain things may not be true, may not jive, with other things that they know. And that is something that's peculiar about human beings is we want things to cohere. We want things to make sense. And when things don't make sense, we'll hold on to them. I mean, I've met a lot of people who have a lot of contradictions dancing around in their heads. So, but for the most part, we want things to connect in a reasonable way. And we may have different understandings of what we mean by reasonable, but we want it somehow to fit. And we'll even sometimes go to great lengths to reason something out. And we may not be hearing ourselves very well, but sometimes the reasoning is very contrived, but it's a push. And that's my point. It's a push to try and make things fit together. So anyway, I was telling my wife that all the political stuff is really has been wearing me down. And so what I've decided is I want to go back to um, the things that are most important to me, to my life, and to where I want to go from here. I'm not done writing. I'm not done teaching through my writing. I'm not
Trump's
done.
Trump's running the world at 80. Come on, we got time.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty remarkable what he's achieving. And the other thing I think I found I can rest in is for me as a conservative, Trump is in office. I think he's doing an amazing job. I don't know. I struggle with his rhetoric sometimes, but I've even gotten used to that. And it's just a part of who he is. And that's fine because I didn't vote for him because he's a great rhetorician. I voted for him because I love his policies. And I
And you
think it's
know what he believes, whether you agree with it or not, you always know where he stands on something. He's
the
not
guy's
one of
open.
these that are, yeah,
Yeah. He's an open book.
yeah. I appreciate that more than that's worth something just in and of itself. I wish there were leftists that would be that honest, but it's like, no, they always have to disguise. It's it's interesting. So I appreciate the out there, even the flawed out there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Me too. Um, and the other thing about it that gives me comfort is he's got a great administration. The people who are head the different departments, I think, are solid. are doing really good work, are really working for the American people, not against the American people. So I can rest in that, and that gives me more of an ability, I think, to just move on to other things and let them handle the fights, let them take care of it because they're doing a really good job.
And to
They're
get
winning the
trapped in the
vast majority.
drama.
Yeah, I mean, they're winning the vast majority of court cases. The few they lose are minor in comparison to the wins. So, and you know you're not going to win every time, but you fight to win every time, and even though you know you won't. And so it's I can rest in that. So that's allowed me to think more about other things, and that's giving me energy instead of worrying.
Yeah, it's good psychologically to
Yes,
step away.
yes,
Yeah. And so when I was editing our last episode and going back through my notes, because I wrote a lot about these concepts in my book To Conquer Death, and I'm currently working on my audiobook version of it. And I'm editing and refining some of the ideas that are in there, and I feel like I'm solidifying some of those ideas. And I remember when I was writing the book, and there was one particular chapter that I was like, I know this is controversial. I know Christians fall onto different sides of this issue. So we're not talking about atheists and stuff like that. I'm talking about people that are in the Christian realm that claim Christ are forgiven, everything we would admit that they're Christians, and we differ on this one. I do believe our conversation about biological evolution, it's really rooted in an opposite that's trying to influence the way Christians think of the truth.
yes,
It doesn't mean you're not a Christian, but it's trying to diminish the authority of the Word of God. There's that mockery tone. And I think we as Christians need to bolster ourselves up and just say, well, no, we really
right.
do, and I think that's what episode 3 was really all about, was we don't have to throw out the word of God. There's science, there's evidence, it's everywhere around us. Get Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and then, all of Genesis really, but I look at it as history, but it's written in a mythological style, a tone, a story, but it's got poetry and it's got all these beautiful components to it. That doesn't diminish it, though, in my mind, elevates it because God is communicating to us through that story the truth. And what is that truth? That's where we always kind of go, well, what does it actually mean? And what's the symbolism of all these things? And when I look at Genesis 1 and 2, particularly the creation account, what I did in my book was I integrated the two
Yeah.
and show how they're compatible.
Okay.
And so I believe in the authority of the Word of God, and I cannot escape the exegetical reality that God created in 6 literal days. I truly believe that's what Moses was communicating. I believe through Moses, God was communicating, and he was compiling the story that had been passed on to him from Adam on through. He's a long time after creation.
Hmm.
God didn't just download that story into his brain. There was a history behind it. There was oral tradition. There was the stories of Abraham, Joseph, etc.,
Okay.
that had been passed on to him through all of these things. And I believe those stories were told in a way that could be listened to and were interesting and concise. And that's what we see. But it still points to a historical reality. And so I believe Moses takes it as, hey, it was 6 days. And on the seventh day, he rested. Perfect pattern. And it was that. And so I think most Christians kind of accept that idea. But then this is what I think happens, this is what I would like to explore with you is we go, okay, well, now we know with our telescopes and how long it takes for light to travel. And there's galaxies that are bazillions of miles away, light years away. It couldn't be 6 days. You couldn't have light travel that far. So there causes this short circuit. Still, Christians who still want to believe the authority of the Word of God kind of have to go, well, yeah, that does seem kind of ridiculous. Maybe it was metaphorical days. And then we start running to the races with all these other possible explanations and things like that. What I would like to explore with you is my ideas about how it can only make sense that it was rapid in 6 days for the universe to be developed, created. It was the ramifications of that and the possibilities of that.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. But before we jump into that, your assumption about how the interpretation of Genesis changed because of science, the advancement of science, like maybe starting in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s.
Particularly the 1800s is where it really ramped up.
Sure, sure, especially with Darwin. I thought that too. And then I read Augustine's City of God. And the latter part, not the whole latter part, but in the latter part of the City of God, Augustine goes into God being the creator. And he talks about different interpretations of Genesis 1. And they included allegory and metaphor and so on. And the reason, because there were some places in Genesis that, if you took it chronologically, didn't make sense to Christians of that time period. Like in Genesis 1, for example, and this is often brought out, even today it's still brought out, and that is, you have God saying, "Let there be light," on day 1, and then on the 3rd day creating the light bearers. Um and so the issue was, well, how could you have the light bearers coming later than light? And so that prompted different understandings of the days. And then Augustine himself, evening and morning, because of this light issue, he said you couldn't have evening and morning without the sun and the moon. So evening and morning must refer to something else. And Augustine's speculation was it referred to different orders of angels.
Okay.
Now,
Because like Job implies that there were angels at the singing into creation.
sure. So, that alerted me to the fact that no, 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 no. There have been different interpretations of Genesis 1 for many, 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 many hundreds of years. And it had nothing to do with scientific investigation. It had to do with trying to make sense of the text. And so what that did, at least when I was studying this in more detail, was it led me to just say, okay, let's just go back, study the text, put science aside. In fact, I've seen certainty in science as a rarity, truly a rarity. It's based upon more probable or likely conclusions than it is on anything else. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to go into the text and see, okay, are there clues to understanding Genesis? Now, I was intrigued by your comment about that you thought that Genesis had a kind of a mythological flavor. Can you unpack that more?
Well, if we get time to do it, I want to show you how the reading of the Enuma Elish and the creation story,
Okay.
and even the Egyptian cosmology story. I have documents of that. I'll pull up and edit them in so people can really see them and know where they're from. Now, when I say mythology, I'm thinking of it in a very broad category of religious texts that accept the idea that there's a spiritual world interacting with the physical world. Atheism seems the only one that wants to just discard it all, and that this is mindless, all by chance, which we demonstrated can't be true. And chance is not a creator. And so when I talk about Genesis, let me put Moses in his historical context. People, typically Christians that I've talked to about this and have heard talk about it, put him into a Mesopotamian framework. But that's a mistake, because where did he grow up? In Egypt. He was raised in the palace with the pharaoh himself. His mother, is a foster mother, adoptive mother, was the daughter of the pharaoh. But anyways,
Do you
so
do you
he
take it
had the,
do you take it was the 1400s?
yes, I
Yeah,
believe
me
the
too. Me too.
the Exodus was 1450-ish, right? So I just, in my mind, 1500, it's easier.
Yep.
It's interesting, Abraham about 2000 BC, Moses 500, 15, Daniel around 500. And so it's an easy breakdown. 1,000 would be David Solomon. So it's kind of that framework that I work off of when I teach. Okay. So Moses, we have to reconsider our perception of Moses. He is a highly educated, multilingual, advanced degree type guy. He's politically savvy. Josephus implies he was an architect. He may have been involved in building some of these great monuments, not the pyramids, but the time of Moses,
Hmm.
he really was integrated into that Egyptian culture and he forsook it all. God brought him full circle from the burning bush all the way around after the Exodus, then back and the Red Sea, back to the place, to the mountain where God's presence was. Then we begin this journey of a couple of years there, him getting the law of God. Then they go to the promised land, and 10 of the spies say, "No way." And 2 of them say, "Yes, we can." And God punishes them by letting him wander for 40 years. During that time, he's in the tent of meeting, which is just outside of the tabernacle, meeting with God. He's so close to God. He's glowing. People can't stand the presence of God. God is too holy for them. It's too aggravating. Moses is the prophet, the spokesman. What's going on during that time? Is that when God just downloads Genesis into his mind? No. He does download the law of God. He communicates to Moses the law, but the history that we see in Genesis, he's compiling. He's gathering. He's hearing the stories of his people. He knows the deep history. That's how people transferred history. So I believe these stories of Genesis 1, 2, 3 are probably angelic revelations to Adam, Eve, passed on through time. And then when the flood happens, and then after the flood, there's a confusion of languages, but the story, it remains intact. People make a big deal of all the flood stories of all these other cultures, but if you read the biblical flood story and the account, it's very mathematical. There's very precise. It's different than all the rest. So even though it's written in this mythological style,
Hmm.
in the sense of a story, captivating, easy to read, concise, it's got a depth and breadth and meaning that's rich, that's very powerful. That it uses all the components of poetry, of ideas, of symbols, of timing. It really truly is the greatest piece of literature ever, because it not only just is great at the moment, it spans thousands of years and multiple generations and multiple nations. And you can see a single author constructing and weaving everything together and confirming, linking together all these great stories. Well, here's the most interesting one that I think I'm so glad you brought it up. I've heard this from a pastor on Sunday on online, a pastor that I watch. I've heard it. I've seen an atheist confront Dinesh D'Souza with that question of why the sun and moon weren't created until day 4. So how could there be light before that? That's suggesting that there was light and a cycle of light and dark before the sun and moon. Let's just point this out. Their own theory says it all started with light, and then later on, the stars and suns came along. So they have the very same problem. They just don't see it as a problem. They don't look at themselves and go, well, how could there be light before there's suns and moons, you silly people? Unlike any other book in the ancient world,
Right.
that there would be light before there was suns and moons, which seems like a ridiculous idea to all of us because that's where we think light comes from. But there was light before those.
Right.
There was an electromagnetic radiation field that then developed into those and formed those. So that's not a fair accusation against the Bible. It actually elevates Genesis 1 and 2 if we accept the idea of, if we want to go, Big Bang theory is true and God created using the Big Bang and he's the source of power that brought about everything. And he exploded it into existence and there was light. And then over bazillions of years, it kind of coalesced into the suns and moons. We call that day 4. So symbolically, it actually fits the pattern, right?
Yeah.
It's it's
Yeah.
not it's not a ridiculous thing. It
No.
actually proves the Bible's inspired because did Moses understand that? No. But he told what God told him to say, and it makes sense when the evidence presents itself.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, assuming that the interpretation that you're arguing is correct, I definitely think that that's a good response to a criticism, of the view that you're taking. I came to a different conclusion. It's so let me just give you a summary or the concluding statement of my view, and then I'll go into some of the details to justify it. First of all, so my conclusion is that the days of Genesis um, uh, could be 24-hour periods, but I don't think that they're periods of creation. I think they're periods of revelation. And I combine two different views of Genesis, which is a literary framework view, which I'll explain in a minute, and a revelation day view. But before I get into those, what I want to do is go back to the mythological idea. I took that view for a while too. And under the supposition that Moses was the author, the human author of Genesis. And I think he's the author of part of it, but I don't think he's the author of most of it. I think Moses is the author of the Joseph story, but I don't think he's the author of any of the others. A um uh I think he's a compiler and an editor of the others. So your understanding of, him him taking histories and kind of and weaving them, putting them together in Genesis, I buy into partly, but I buy into it for a different reason. There's this peculiar thing that happens in Genesis. Like, let's just look at them. There are 11 instances of this kind of framing. At Genesis 2, verse 4, this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made earth and heaven. This is the account of. That phrase is based upon a Hebrew word that means the historical origin of. So this is the historical origin of the heavens and the earth. This is the historical account of. This is why I reject the myth idea. I just completely, I completely disowned it.
Well, can I insert right here?
Well,
Again,
wait a
what I
minute.
mean by myth is not, I
No,
don't
no, no,
negate
no,
that.
no. I
Yeah.
know what you mean. I know what you mean. But I took it out of this kind of religious narrative idea and that has been advanced, mostly in modern day, and put it back into the context of a pure historical narrative. Because starting with that, this phrase occurs again, Genesis 5:1. Genesis 5:1, this is the book. Now it adds the Hebrew word sefer. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. So again, you're talking about, and it's interesting that sefer is used here, and I think that's a key. I'll come back to that. But this is again the idea of historical narrative. And then you have this phrase, it comes up again. Let's see, is it just where is it? 10 in Genesis 10:1. Now these are the records or the account of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So you've got this happening 11 times in Genesis, and it stops just before the Joseph story. And it doesn't occur again in the final chapters of Genesis. So
Let me clarify, is the word Toledeth, is that what
yeah,
I think that's
Toledeth.
the word. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Toledeth is a Hebrew word.
Yes.
This is the
In these
historical account of.
generations, this
Yeah,
is a
it's sometimes
historical.
translated. Yeah, it's sometimes translated as generations, but the emphasis is on the historical origin. That's the idea. So I thought, okay, so we have these various instances of this. So what is this phrase? What's the importance of this? Since it's repeated 11 times, there's significance to that phrase exegetically. I'm trying to figure out what it is. So I came across a book by a archaeologist and a Old Testament scholar, P.J. Wiseman, and the book is called "The Clues to Genesis" or "Clues to." Was it Genesis or Creation? One of those. I'll look it up here and give it to you. But in this work, what he does is he looks at this phrase too, and he says, do we have any ancient parallel to this that where we can compare it to, in maybe in Sumerian or in some other, or in Egyptian, or in some other ancient language? Or is this a cross-cultural idea, or could it be tied to kind of the writing material that was being used? Because, for example, in Egypt, you've got papyrus is used a lot, but in the Middle East, cuneiform is used, stone tablets, because papyrus isn't as readily available. What he discovered is the Gilgamesh epic was written on stone tablets, and there were other ancient creation accounts that were written on stone tablets. And the stone tablets had a framework. They didn't have page numbers like what we have, so they had to signify how these stone tablets went together, how you connect them in case they ever got out of order. And so what you have is, you have at the start of a stone tablet, you have a heading, and not like a subtitle, but it works functionally. It has um, the same use as we use subtitles. It'll have a heading. The first line of the tablet will act as the heading, the topic of what's to come, and then at the end at the bottom of the stone tablet, it'll have a closing line that links back in some way to the heading and identifies who the author is. Okay, so let's go back to Genesis 1. So Genesis 1, the heading would be, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And what would be the end? The end would be Genesis 2:4. This is the account, it's looking back. This is the account of the heavens and the earth. Links back to Genesis 1:1. When they were created, now here's the date, because the last line of a tablet or a series of tablets will give the date. In the day that the Lord God made earth and heaven, the Lord is mentioned there, not Adam, not Eve, but Yahweh. Yahweh is mentioned. What's the significance of that? Wiseman concluded this section, the author is Yahweh. If you look at Genesis 5:1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. So what is that recording? That's recording the Genesis 2 so-called second creation account, which isn't really. It's just a focus on what's going on in the Garden of Eden. And it's focused on Eden, and it's focused a little bit on what's outside of the garden. And so Genesis 5:1 says, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Okay, it's talking about Adam and Eve and his descendants. In the day when God created him, that's going back to the first part of the account, the heading and the conclusion of Genesis 2:4.
Yeah.
He made him in the likeness of God. So who is the author here? Wiseman said, that's Adam.
Interesting. That's cool.
And you go through each one, and it identifies who wrote it, and it identifies the general time period. Now, when we think of date, we think of, January 2nd, 2026, or we have a day and a month and a year. Well, that's not the way it usually worked in the ancient world.
Well, I've seen the Toledoth connection before, but the connect it with the idea that's the author. But that fits well with what I was saying, is I do believe that these stories were passed on to Moses. They weren't just him sitting down, wandering around in the wilderness, as some
Right.
suggest, and
Right.
he was just making this up.
Right.
That's the mythological part that I throw aside too. This
Right.
is deeply rooted in transference of historical data. I guess I would, it's a genre in my mind, as broadly as you.
Okay, so let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that Wiseman's understanding of this material is correct. This is correct, and there was a series
Beautiful
of
idea.
cuneiform tablets that were passed on by who? Well, I would say they passed on by Hebrews. They were passed on by the Hebrew people. And who comes into possession of these? Moses. Moses comes in possession. And they talk about how they got these tablets, how they were passed along to the families, And so he, of course, is involved in all of this. And then Moses, I think you're right, in the wilderness is writing all this out. He's writing the history. But the Joseph story is peculiar because the Joseph story doesn't have this kind of a tagline in it. It's absent of it. And I think the reason is because Moses had more intimate knowledge of the Joseph story than anybody because he was in Egypt. And
Yeah.
Joseph was a hero to the Egyptian people. You know, what he did was masterful. He saved the nation. And so he learned the story, maybe even at his mother's knee, who knows? But he learned that story and he adds that to the Genesis account. But we know that he was also playing an editorial role because there's some places where he gives information. He adds something about a local place he's talking about, or
Yeah.
it still exists to this day, or something like that. So we know that even though these are historical accounts that have been passed on, we know that he's putting them together for the people of his day so that they can identify and latch onto it. So I take it that Genesis is history from beginning to end. Had even more confidence in it.
So Genesis 1 and 2 have often been said that they're contradictory. And I wrote an article called The Irreconcilable Differences. Maybe I'll post that. But it kind of shows how these things work together and they sync up to make a beautiful narrative. I mentioned this in our last episode, but I think the Genesis 1 is this is the architectural God. This is the God who designs. He did it very systematically. Here's the 6 days. He thought about it. He presented it. There's other patterns besides Toledo. There's other patterns you
Yeah,
see.
sure.
Yeah. And he says something very interesting in all of that is after their own kind. He says that multiple times. So see, that's very intentional, whether you agree with Moses or not. Moses is clearly articulating, no, everybody pay attention. God created with intentionality, with forethought and design, and he created them in their complete form with the intention that they would reproduce after their own kind. That's exactly what we see. I mean, that's animals reproduce after their own kind. That's not debatable. It actually is like, well, that's a very duh moment for looking at Genesis. Yeah. But no, evolution's kind of convinced people to say, no, that was ridiculous. That's so primitive to think of animals just reproducing after their own kind. We know they evolved through speciation and adaptation over bazillions of years. What's what we know? It's like actually what we do see, Genesis actually lines up perfectly with it. And I could even go deeper into that with even the DNA connection, but not right now. So with the light problem, we see the pattern. I look at patterns of Genesis. The pattern fits even. I was rereading the first chapter of A Brief History of Time with Stephen Hawking, and he references our ideas about, hey, God just brought this up into maturity and development. And therefore, that's been an idea that's been around a long time. And he's saying, well, let's go back and let's suggest how it originated was going back to this Big Bang idea. Now, he does make a little bit of a retort. He's writing obviously for the common person. He's not writing for scientists. He is writing for them too. But he starts his idea with the Big Bang with suggesting about 1929 Edwin Hubble. He says 1929 Edwin Hubble made the landmark observation that wherever you look, distant galaxies are moving rapidly away from us. In other words, the universe is expanding. This means that at earlier times, objects would have been closer together. Okay, so put a stop on that. So that's on page 8 of this version of Brief History of Time. That is what Edwin Hubble observed, that redshift idea, and things are expanding. But then, listen, this is where they get a little tricky. Stephen Hawking implies that Hubble also intimated that if you take that expansion, they used to be closer together. The Big Bang theorists like Hawking suggest, and earlier ones before him, before it became accepted, was let's keep moving them closer till they were at a singularity. So that was a theoretical suggestion, implication of Hubble's observation that's true. But then they always take it just too far. They decide, no, let's imagine a universe where it went back to a singularity, the point where everything was at the same spot, and a minuscule spot at that. And then it became everything. And then they have all these space-time continuum contradictions in their math, and they've got to, it's all based on this idea. It's just a theoretical idea, a suggestion.
Right.
Hubble's evidence only, though, pointed out that they were used to be closer. He doesn't say how long ago, and he doesn't say how close.
Well, and that's based upon the idea they're expanding. So if they're expanding away from each other, planets and universes, or not universes, but solar systems
Galaxies.
are expanding away from each other, then that implies at one point all that stuff was much closer. And it
Closer than it
implies,
is now.
yeah, it implies an explosion, some kind of an event that exploded all of this out.
Yeah, and that's what the big bait. He says this next, but Hubble didn't suggest that. He actually distanced himself from he said that's pure speculation. And so Hawking, though, just continues it as if Hubble's evidence pointed to this. In other words, the universe is expanding. This means that in earlier times, objects would have been closer together. True, that's what Hubble suggested. And then he says, in fact, it's not fact, but he says, in fact, it seemed, see, that makes it contradictory right there. In fact, it seemed that there was a time about 10 or 20,000 million years ago. That's a big span of, hey, maybe about that, when they were all at exactly the same place and when, therefore, the density of the universe was in. So here's where I want us to stop and go, well, let's think about this. So the electromagnetic radiation field that's been confirmed, that's everywhere throughout the entire universe. Pretty evenly, they say at an even temperature, and there's pockmarks and there's differentials and there's differences, but it's everywhere. You have pictures of it on the internet. Maybe I'll put some up here where you can just see the electromagnetic field. What is electromagnetic radiation? It's light, and it's everywhere, evenly distributed is the point. Well, their theory is that it's all somehow became cool. It started out at a super hot infinite point that was minuscule, that could not be seen, but it exploded into and then expanded to the far distances that we have, and then cooled evenly. And then all the galaxies formed out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's just let me throw my hat into the mix as far as a theoretical model is, what if that light, when God spoke, was everywhere? Why do we envision it as starting at a point and expanding? It's a theoretical idea suggested in the 1900s or 1800s. Why not look at even Hubble's evidence and say, it appears that if you look at Hubble's evidence, there was a time when the universe was closer. Galaxies were somewhat close, in cosmic space, closer, but we don't know when that began. We don't know how long ago that began. When did those galaxies form? All we really see are galaxies that are expanding, and that's what we observe. We see actually completeness, not age. And so if light, when God spoke, and he's the only one. The word of God is the only one that suggests light was at the beginning, that was the first organizing principle. Well, string theory suggests that now. String theory suggests that light was at the beginning, that it's the formative design that ties together everything. Well, then why throw away Genesis? Why reduce the Bible to ridiculous? Because it's actually the only ancient piece of literature that even suggests the idea that in the beginning there was light that brought order to everything. Now,
Why do you think,
go ahead.
why do
Okay.
you think light was in the beginning?
I believe if the string theorists' description of things is accurate, I mean, even if it isn't, it got to be refined and it's not been proven and all that kind of stuff. But what they're suggesting, guys like Brian Greene are suggesting, is that we're essentially light. Everything is light, and light through multidimensional 11 dimensions, interactions and vibrations
Yeah.
form into the molecules and all the atoms and everything else that we are. I even saw episodes of Star Trek that suggest that thing of we're essentially light, that the most evolved form of humanity would be, or of any alien being or any being in existence would be, to be light.
Well, if I'm going to be a light bulb, I hope I never go out.
Light with individuality. Yeah. We won't. See, that's the beauty of immortality, is we won't go out.
Go back to Genesis 1. and I'm just talking exegetically, okay? Not bringing in the science. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's verse 1. Verse 2, the earth was formless and void. It starts with land. Doesn't
Well,
start with light.
for
Whoa, 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 just a minute.
chaos.
Exegetically, it starts with land. And the earth was formless and void. Formless and void, that's really interesting because I think that's the first instance that you have here in Genesis 1. In Genesis 1,
Yeah.
actually is going to give a framework, a structural suggestion of what's to follow. Because what we have is God in the first 3 days is God making the formless formed, and in the last 3 days, Him filling the void. So, but the earth is formless and void. So we don't have light at first; we have land, and then
But
God
waters.
says,
It's so land and waters. So it's I believe that's the metaphor of chaos, of not there's no organization. He
but
speaks.
it's not talking about the universe. We're not talking about the universe in verse 2.
Correct.
You go from verse 1, where you're talking about everything, the heavens and the earth, okay? That would be the universe. But it's in verse 2, we start with we immediately the account goes to this planet.
Well, that's our
So that was the other thing that struck me. And when I hear preaching and so on, first thing God did was light. Well, exegetically, I don't think I can show that. Not from Genesis 1. What I can show from Genesis 1 is that God creates the heavens and the earth, doesn't tell us how, just said he did it. And then verse 2, immediately the focus goes from the universe to this planet.
Yeah, remember Debbie, she brought to my attention this very same thing. And she said, and I'd have to look her up and see what she was referring to or try to do some more research on it. But she was suggesting science has been moving towards like, revealing that actually planetoid or that kind of this kind of material we're on was developing first even before the sun or suns, I'll say stars. And so I would like to look at that more. And I think that's the reason she was sharing that with me is that very reason. So I guess what I mean by let there be light, that's the first organizing principle. So there's chaos, everything's formless. God had made I believe that's the materials that he's going to organize, whatever those materials are. That's where it's like, yeah, science can maybe help us understand that, but they shouldn't replace it with God. And I want to get to this in just a minute with the Egyptian understanding and comparing it to the Genesis understanding. So I think Moses is clearly saying there's chaos. The earth was formless and void. There was no formation. There was no order. There was no organization anywhere. And then the first organizing principle is let there be light. And that's where everything starts organizing. It's an organizing statement. And then there's the pattern of light and darkness.
I can accept that. I think even from an exegetical standpoint, that makes sense.
Yeah, he was working with something when he made the light. That's true. But before the something, there was nothing. So out of nothing, he created this formless and void. And then void may be a reference to space, and the earth was
Well,
formless.
and since Genesis chapter 1 zeroes in on the earth, I think it gives us insight into what God was doing with the rest of the universe, what he was doing, because now we get a picture of what he's doing with this planet. What was he doing with the others? I think God is
Klingons, come on, wait, he was making Klingons.
I think God as creator is much more of an expansive idea than we even sometimes give it credit for. We sometimes think, well, yeah, he created the universe, and then we kind of walk away from that, and we have no idea. We think naturalistically of what was going on with the other planets and the stars and all of that stuff. But from Genesis 1, when it hit me that really Genesis 1 is primarily focused on this planet and what God is doing with it. And then the planets like the sun that are in relationship, or a star that are in relationship to it, it made me wonder, well, what was God doing with other solar systems, other galaxies? And, it's just what in other words, in looking out at it, it's not like just nature took its course, but that it's like a cosmic painting done
Yeah.
by God. This is all
And
God's work.
well, the stars and planets in day 4 are to be the sun and moon and et cetera are to be the way we keep track of time. It's the source of our calendars, and
Sure,
which is very significant for how we relate to each other and relate to this earth, is the
sure.
passage of time moving through these things. And I tried to investigate, this would be worthwhile, I think, for somebody might. This is an interesting aspect that I would like to explore more, but the 24-hour day, is that embedded into time itself? Not just because of our positioning and what we know as a 24-hour day or passage of time. Is that something that's embedded into cycles or rhythms that we find elsewhere? It's just an odd thought that I've had because it's so criticized. Like, well, there was an evening and morning the first day. Well, there was no sun and moon the first day. So what does that mean? It's clearly meant to imply that there was a very sequential. This is what I believe Moses is trying to convey. We go, oh, he's ridiculous. But he's trying to convey that evening and morning, the first day, the way we perceive time now was the way God created it even before the sun and moon. And there was a pattern and there was an arrangement. And I can totally accept the idea. I can live with that and go, that's enough for me. That God is the one who systematically, through the patterns that we see linguistically, through the style of writing, through the genre of writing, through the patterns of that we see, the rhythms of Genesis 1. Then we jump into Genesis 2, where it is now very personable. It's God coming down and he forms us out of Adam out of the mud. He parades the animals so animals will be named. Their essence, their being is identified by Adam. And all those things, how we're supposed to function. He talks about the stars and the moon and everything in Genesis 1, but in Genesis 2, it's a much more relational, personal God who walks with us in the garden. And that's so it's not contradictory, it's complementary. They both together give us the full picture. So I believe that speaks to intentionality of purpose from a single author like Moses, that he is showing the Hebrews what it is that they've experienced. So it's very comprehensive. And then later on in Genesis 5 and Genesis 10, he talks about the genealogies and he gives years, how long ago all this was. So I do think he's trying to say very clearly God created in 6 days, rested on the seventh. That's why the pattern of the Sabbath, which is part of God's law, which is very much a part of God's law. It's like 10 commandment worthy. And also his idea that it wasn't that long ago.
Well, let's talk
So
okay,
that's
okay,
where I want to go to with the Egyptian understanding compared to the Hebrew. But go ahead. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, yeah. Before we do that, let's talk about the days in Genesis, because that was the other thing that struck me. Um, what I did when I started looking at this is one thing I noticed is day one, it doesn't say the first day. It says day one. It's the second day that's when you get the phrase the second day. That's when, and in Hebrew, there's actually the addition of an article. So is the second day. It's not day two. And that's the same thing with the third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, and seventh day. They all have the definite article. So what you have is you have a difference in numbers. Day one is a cardinal number. Now,
One day.
a cardinal number is if I'm talking about quantity. Like I went out today and I brought home 3 bags of groceries. 3 is an ordinal number. It's telling you how many I had. Okay. That's what's used for day one. For the other days is a cardinal number, and the cardinal number indicates sequence.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a difference in the
Second.
way,
So versus one day, then second day.
yeah, from second to seventh day indicates a sequence. Okay. Now, I'm not saying whether they're solar days or ages. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just talking about the numbers that are being used. So I did some investigation. There's this reform principle that scripture interprets scripture. Okay, so I looked up every single instance of numbers in the Old Testament with the article. And every time it was used, this is what I discovered. Almost every time it's used with an article, it means a solar day, a 24-hour period. Almost. There are two exceptions that I found. Maybe there might be more, but I only found two. One is in Genesis itself, Genesis, the seventh day. The seventh day is ongoing. It's not a 24-hour period. How do I know that? Hebrews chapter 4 talks about us entering into God's Sabbath rest, and he's referring back to the Sabbath rest of creation. So the Sabbath rest is ongoing. There is no 24-hour
Well,
period.
the day is still Yom,
Oh
the
yeah,
seventh.
the Hebrew word remains the same. The Hebrew word for day remains the same throughout Genesis 1 and 2. But I'm talking about the number. The number related to it gives a sequence, and now Yom, that's different. Yom by itself, apart from a number, has all kinds of meanings. It can mean age. It can mean a 24-hour period. It can mean an era.
He actually uses it in Genesis 2 in that sense, in an era. I'll show you that in a minute. Hold on, I'm sorry to interrupt.
So anyway, so yeah, Yom by itself has multiple meanings, just like the English word for day has multiple meanings. But when used with a number, it narrows down the meaning range. And when it comes to a solar day, since Yom used with a number, vast majority of cases means a solar day. So here in Genesis 1, if you deny that it doesn't mean solar days, the burden of proof is on you to show it. Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Uh, your best bet is to argue from the seventh day not being a 24-hour period.
Evening and morning one day is also a part of it. And it's
Okay.
not a part of the seventh day. He doesn't say evening and morning, the seventh.
That's true, which is a clue, which could be a literary clue that you should not understand the seventh day as a 24-hour period. I mean, that would be one of the arguments I would give if I were arguing for your position. Okay. So I concluded exegetically, okay, so day one, because it's a day of quantity, not it doesn't have anything to do with how long a day is or anything. You can't relate it that way. Um, Day one is the only day where I would say, I don't know if it's a
I see
24-hour
what you're
period
saying.
or not.
Okay, I see what you're
The
saying.
days 2 through 6, I would say definitely solar days.
Hmm,
Okay.
that's a really good. And then the seventh day is
Now the question is,
potentially.
are they solar days of creation? Or are they solar days of something else? I noticed that the first 3 days, the formless is being formed. The last 3 days, the void is being filled. And so I thought, okay, so we've got some kind of a structure going on here. What's the structure? And I did some more investigation of different Old Testament scholars. And what came out was there's what they call an inverted chiasm is representative in Genesis. And that means a chiasm usually it usually looks like a triangle like this, but inverted chiasm, it starts like this and comes to a point. So the point of the chiasm is the Sabbath rest. That's the bottom of it. What's at the top? The top is day 1 and day 4 correspond to each other.
Okay.
And then you go down a little bit more. Day 2 and day 5 correspond to each other. You go down farther. Day 3, day 5, or day 6 correspond. And then the pinnacle of the inverted chiasm is the Sabbath rest.
I love that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And remember, you were talking about the poetic elements? Well, that would be one of the poetic elements in Genesis. The way it's structured is just gorgeous. So then I sat back and I looked at it and I thought, well, do we have a sequence then? If we have a chiastic structure like that, should we take it as a sequence going from day 1 down to day 7? Or should we take it as a sequence going day 1, day 4, day 2, day 5, day 3, day 6, 7? And it makes more sense given the structure to take it that way. And if that's the case, then we don't have a chronology going from day 1 to day 7, kind of this way. We have instead this chiastic structure going this way. And if I look at it that way, and then I sit back and go, okay, so what are the basic findings of science? What do they basically tell us about the development of things? That, broadly speaking, that fits the development that science, presents to us. Now, that doesn't tell us about the speed of the development. I haven't touched on that. Okay. But it just, broadly speaking, Genesis 1 then and the first part of Genesis 2 would support what what science has, you know, basically said. Now, so then I wondered, okay, so what is this evening and morning stuff? I disagree with Augustine that it refers to angels, and there were other kinds of speculation about what the evening and morning was. But if you're looking at this as a chiastic structure, what would be the and if these are, again, another if these days, say day 1 was written on its own stone tablet, and day 2 was written on its own tablet, its own uniform tablet. So you got these 7 tablets. Then what is evening and morning referring to? And I thought it was weird. It struck me as weird that it would be God saying, "Well, it's evening. I'm going to stop now." That kind of idea. It seemed more like, if we're talking about historical narrative here, could it be? And again, this is conjecture. But could it be that's as much of the revelation God was going to give on that day? And then the second day, he gives more revelation. And then there was evening and there was morning. And then the third day is another day of revelation. And each day it gets longer. And I'm wondering, if God is giving this revelation to Adam, maybe that's as much as Adam could absorb in a particular
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Again, now you hear a lot of maybes and ifs going on. I'm conjecturing. I don't know for sure, but it would fit an understanding of the God of the universe revealing to this brand new human being information that God wants him to have about where he fits in the creation of things. So it, it seemed to me that that's what we have going on here. Um, so my view is a combination of those two views: that literary framework where you have that inverted chiastic structure, recognizing that as the structure of Genesis 1, and then adding to that this revelation day idea. So I take it that the days of Genesis are revelation days. Okay, now I had a problem. And my problem is, well, but in the Old Testament, the 6-day week is compared to the creation week. So is a 6-day work week, which are solar days. They're not they're not ages or epochs or anything like that. And I've already concluded the 6 days in Genesis are solar days. So is that somehow, do we have to take it that that comparison is one of solar days for creation as well? And here's what I discovered. I got to refer to my notes on this. What I discovered is that comparison of like in Exodus 23:12. Let's look at that. Exodus 23:12. It says, 6 days you are to do your work, but on the 7th you shall cease from labor, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female slave as well as your stranger may refresh themselves. Now notice here it's talking about the work week, but it doesn't refer to the creation week at all.
Yeah.
Here it's referring to you work 6 days and then you rest on the 7th, and all of your animals are to rest too. Has no reference to the creation week. And then if you go to Exodus 31:15 to 17, here we have, for 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall surely be put to death. So the sons of Israel shall observe the Sabbath to celebrate the Sabbath throughout their generation as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, but on the 7th day he ceased from labor and was refreshed. So you have a direct connection between their labor and their rest with the creation story.
Yeah.
Okay. So I found that and I said, okay, well, that's a strong argument, it seems, for taking the creation week as describing 24-hour days of creation, not of revelation, like I was taking them. Okay. So then I thought, okay, so does it come up again using any other kinds of illustrations? So here I found this. Let's see, where is it? Deuteronomy 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5, see, 12 through 15. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, and even your sojourner, and it goes on and on. Then it says in verse 15, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now we have a reference not to the creation week, but to the Exodus.
Okay.
So here's what I concluded. There is no necessary connection between between working 6 days and resting on the seventh day and the 6 days of Genesis as being 24-hour periods. That's our supposition. Instead, it's working as an archetype. It's it's more symbolic or analogous. It's not working as it doesn't have a one-to-one correspondence with every feature of the creation week to the workday. We shouldn't take it that way. That's what I concluded. Now, not everybody concludes that, but that's what I concluded. As I looked at more and more information, I thought that argument that the work week tells us how we should understand the creation week, I don't think correlates. I don't think that argument is as strong as people try and make it.
Okay.
I
But
think
so the archetype idea, I do think that's where I think the Frank Turek's and you and others and within the realm of Christianity kind of take that. And I see the point and I understand. I love literature and I love the poetry and I like the imagery and ideas. I actually love what Jordan Peterson does with his insights into Genesis, even though he would not admit that they were historical realities, but he sees it so clearly what they mean. And Origen did the same thing. He was kind of a archetype kind of a guy. He went his own way in some things, but he really wanted to see there's some spiritual meaning behind these things. And I think that's definitely there. But here's where I'm so weird and stubborn. And this is what I really think we make a mistake in abandoning. Let me make my case that Moses meant, and it's intended to, it's clearly correlated in the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20:11, clearly, and in Deuteronomy is, hey, this was the 6 days of creation, and on the seventh day he rested. Clearly, 6 days. And I understand there's also could be an archetypal connection. There is. Jesus is the fulfillment of that Sabbath. He's the Sabbath rest we've been longing for. He's the one that's going to bring about the Sabbath year that's going to end up being all sins are forgiven. I see all of those things too. I'm not a literalist in a childish way, but I do believe that he is trying to build in our minds a construct that God did it quickly and rapidly, and it intended to argue against the old earth, ancient universe concept that evolutionists require. I personally believe that Genesis 1 and 2, inspired by God, revealed through Moses, was to contradict evolution that we have today. But not just today. See, the ancient Egyptians believed in evolution too.
yes, they did.
Not in the Darwinian mechanism of natural selection, but they did. So that's what I want to prove to you, and to show that, see, the concept that the Hebrews had grown up with all the gods in the Egyptian religion, they had a built-in cultural sense of vast amounts of time and deep time. The Egyptians had that. It was deep, deep, unending, backwards time. Moses is not just trying to show that God did it, but that he did it quickly, not in a vast amount of time. So I think it's very
Can I add a note that
intentional, and I'll bring up my notes. Go ahead.
I just want to add a note to support what you're saying. In Exodus, the plagues that are brought against Egypt, every one of those plagues goes against an Egyptian god or set of gods. We even have, I think it's in Numbers, where we're told that through the plagues, God exposed the Egyptian deities as false gods. It's at least that's the point of the passage.
The
And
pattern is to confront the false gods.
right, right. So I think there are good there are exegetical reasons to that you could use to support what you're going to say. So
Okay.
go for it.
All right. So I get this from what's called the Book of Knowing the Evolutions of Ra, and it's extracted from Budge, The Gods of the Egyptians, Volume 1, pages 308 to 21, and there's a version A and a version B. Now, I'm going to start with the version B because it really says more clearly what gives you a good concept of the way the Egyptians conceived of built a foundation for how people were to perceive reality. Every culture does that. Naturalistic atheism today dominates the way we perceive reality. Well, go to another culture, even in today's world, and you'll see they work hard at building a culture that frames the way people think about reality. And then they work within that framework. And cultures do that throughout time. It's nothing new. I'm not even being critical of it. I believe the Bible is trying to give us a framework in which to understand reality, and that's the one I believe, and that's the one I immerse myself in, and it better explains what we see than any other version, and that's what I'm trying to defend here. So the Egyptian concept, which Moses would have been perfectly aware of, he would have been known it to the nth degree, he was educated in it, and he rejected it. Here's what the Book of Knowing of Evolutions of Ra, version B, says. And this is the words of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar may not be a familiar name like Ra, but hang with me. I'll define Nebuchadnezzar in a minute. Is, quote, I was the creator of what came into being, Nebuchadnezzar. I came into being in the form of Khepera, coming into being in primeval time. I came into being in the forms of Khepera. I was, or became, the creator of what came into being. That is to say, I produced myself from the primeval matter which I made. I produced myself from primeval matter. My name is Osiris. So they have the idea that Nebuchadnezzar is the God who was before all this stuff, but then he brings himself into being, and the universe is his body. So it's this panentheist idea that the universe is God. It fits well with the New Age movement idea and all these things. So that's what the Egyptians were believing. That's what Moses is going up against.
Yeah. It actually sounds like you're making more sense out of the Egyptian myth than the myth does. Because in the myth, you have primordial reality, and then the god creates himself out of the reality and then claims, and I made the primordial stuff.
Yeah,
Come on, you can't have it both ways.
I know. I'm being
And
a little too gracious.
yeah, I thought you were being really kind. But what first hit me when you said that is not only is it clearly absurd compared to what Genesis 1:1 says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There was God first and then everything else. And God didn't make himself. God didn't create himself. But a self-caused being is impossible. You can't create yourself before yourself.
You can't exist before you exist.
It's absurd. But
Yes.
this is I guess the thing I wanted to just say, this is one of the things that has struck me over the years. When you come to things that are clearly unbiblical, when you really analyze them, they're distorted. It's a result of distorted thinking. Distorted thinking is a part of the matrix of the kind of belief system. And distorted thinking is always the result of, because sin is irrational. It's irrational to believe something that's false. It's irrational to try and reason your way to a conclusion that is false. And so what the Egyptian myth displayed to me right off the bat was it's the result of this really distorted, sinful thinking.
Okay, now let me continue here because I'll make the connection after this part that fits perfectly with what you were just saying. So it goes on and says, I was alone, not existed. There was no other. After he
How
brought
sad.
himself into existence, he was alone. He was the only one that existed. He worked with me in place that I made. I made therein by means of the divine soul, that which I raised up therein out of new, which is from a state of inertness, that I found a place whereon I could stand. I worked with the spirit which was in my heart. I laid a foundation in my heart. Came into being. And here's another major quote. Manifold were the things which came into being of Capera, came into being what they gave birth to out of the creation of their offspring. Behold, my eye brought to me they in the train of Henti periods, Henti, Henti periods, and little aside, a hen period is 60 years. So two hen periods does not equal 120 years, though, but rather an indefinite period of time. This is from
Okay.
E.A. Wallace Budge.
Okay.
And then they also proceeded from me, and I collect. So everything that exists proceeded from me. I collected my members. They came forth from myself after I had union with my clenched hand, came to me, my heart or will out of my hand. The seed which fell into my mouth, I spat in the form of shoe. I emitted water in the form of tefnut. They covered up, made my eye with them bushes twice for hen periods, vegetation. Reptiles came from the god Ram, from the tears falling from me, cried my eye, came into being. Mankind, I endowed it with power. It raged at me after it came finding another growth within its place. Fell its vigorous power upon its bushes, and upon the bushes I placed there to make adornment in it. Ruling therefore its seat in my face, it ruleth the whole earth.
So basically, what the myth is claiming is that there's this primordial matter first, and then out of that, God creates Himself, and then out of Himself, everything else comes.
Yes. So the God creating himself and then everything emanates from him. That's a very Hindu idea as well,
Sure,
Brahma,
it is.
etc. I could show you the quotes from that, but right now we'll just focus on Egypt with what Moses would have understood. So here he is, just escaped Egypt. They were enslaved. They know the God of Abraham. They're aware of this God. But how does God reveal himself to Moses at the burning bush? He gives his name. I am that I am. I am the God who has always existed. That's a distinct separation. Like, I'm not one of these Egyptian gods you knew about. I'm something different. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the one who has revealed himself. You know the stories. You've heard about me. You know all these things. I'm that God. I am the one who exists. So then, as we talked about earlier, he unfolds, God reveals, Moses compiles, is inspired. It's written by God in the sense of guided the understanding and the interpretation of events and framing it all, putting in the patterns that you've noted, that others have noted, but also this really cool parataxis model in Genesis 1 with, I got that name from Robert Alter. He wrote Genesis, or a translation. And it's really beautiful. I don't agree. He doesn't interpret Genesis the way I do, but he has some really good insights. And this one pattern is that he sees there's a very rhythmic pattern. He doesn't talk about the chiasm part. I love that. Put those together, and we see even more depth. Parataxis is systematically, linguistically, here, this is happening early, evening, morning, first day, second day, third. Just there's a pattern of revelation, and God's intentionally seeing this pattern. The pattern is God intent on each day. It's more than just talking about the solar day. We can focus on that. But one, God intends what he is to create. He declares its name and its purpose. It comes into being. Three, it's
Right.
created. He inspects it. and then he declares it good. It functions as fine. See, good is such a weird word, but it means functionality. It's arranged so that it works. And all 6 days, like the pinnacle of creation, woman, is placed together with man, and we are in charge of everything. And before sin, it is very good. It's completely functional exactly the way God wanted it to be. There's no sin, shame, embarrassment, corruption, nothing. You don't get that from the Egyptian or any other kind of origin story. And that's a style of writing called parataxis. It enhanced meaning is enhanced by the style. It's not just the content, but the style tells us something. And if we include your chiasm idea, it tells us there's an intelligence, there's a beyond, there's an inspiration that goes beyond mere human conceptions and arrangement. And if we put all of these beautiful insights together, we end up with something amazing. And then there's the Genesis 2:4 through verse 25, this artistic perspective. And this is where he shifts to what's called a hypotaxis style, which means an elaborate syntactical subordination. This involves the use of clauses that are dependent on each other with connectives. And it's in order to produce a much more natural, human flowing style of writing. Very different, which people have noted, but I say it's show of divine inspiration and revelation about all that is God. So here with the connecting back to the Egyptian idea that there was a God who brought himself into existence, then he was alone, and then he started developing all these creatures from his mind, and there's an indefinite long period of time. The two Henty periods means an indefinite period of time. It actually sounds more like evolution than it does the Bible. We keep trying to make the Bible sound like evolution. Like we want this ancient way, man, how could we possibly conceive of a universe as expansive as it is to have happened within a short period of time? How is that? We can't conceive of that. No, we can't. Naturalistically, we go easily to, man, it must have taken a long time. Egyptians did. And I think Moses, in his very particular stylistic structure, his parataxis structure in Genesis 1, is trying to convince us and the Hebrews at the time and us now that no, it didn't take a long time. In fact, it was very quick. And yes, I organized everything, and I did it in such a way that that is a pattern that's going to be presented to us throughout the rest of time, 6 days, and on the seventh day arrested. And that is what we actually see. And we see Jesus actually affirms the Genesis account as historical, Mark 10:6. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. Quite frankly, I could understand how maybe men could have evolved, from apes. That's a pretty easy connection to make. But woman, they're so far advanced. You couldn't have evolved that. It could evolve a guy, but not a woman. So he made male and female, and he upheld the authority of the Old Testament, including the Sabbath commanded in Exodus 20:11, which states God created in 6 days as the basis for the human work week, which you noted, but that's in the 10 Commandments. That idea is presented, and he's the one who spoke the 10 Commandments. So this is why if it really doesn't matter in the ultimate scheme of things, whether God did it in bazillions of years, took his time, developed things, and we can look at the math and the science of all that and observation. Exegetically, I have a hard time setting aside Moses's point that no, everybody, it was done quickly. God did it miraculously, amazingly. He did it in this time frame, which he reveals to us. Like we note often, there are some things we can look at and draw conclusions from and be rational and come to rational conclusions. The origin of something, we can't do that. Like I can't look at my MacBook computer and go, oh, I know how that was made. I can't. I'd have to be told how it was made. I couldn't figure it out just by opening it up and going, wow, that's really fascinating. how that was made. That's really cool. All these little things. What's that? I have no idea. I could not reverse engineer it. I think the same complexity is what scientists see. And then they, for some reason, I'll say it's a spiritual reason, just go, no, there was no creator. We can figure out how it all was made. I don't think we can. We can see really cool things and we can make really cool observations. Like, wow, how vast is this place? That doesn't negate that God made it. And here's my final point, Job 38. Then Yahweh, same creator God, same name at the beginning. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel? That guy you're listening to, don't listen to him by words without knowledge. Don't listen to that guy. He's trying to hide knowledge from you. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't listen to him. Then in verse 3, God says, Yahweh says, now gird up your loins like a man. So many people have to do that right now. And I will ask you, and you make me know, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me,
Yeah.
if you know understanding, who set its measurements, since you know, or who stretched the line on it, on what were its bases sunk, or who laid its cornerstones, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Who enclosed the sea with doors? When bursting forth it went out. When I made a cloud, its garments in dense gloom, its swaddling hand, and I placed boundaries on it, and set a bolt and doors, and I said, thus far you shall come, but no further, and here you shall hear, and here shall your proud waves stop. Who did all this? God did it. There is nothing we could discover. Scientists try to make it sound like every new discovery is like, wow, aren't I brilliant? You just discovered something God already did. You
Right.
didn't make anything new. You didn't invent anything. You just kind of go, wow, you should go, praise God. This is amazing what I just discovered. This is cool. Not bring glory to yourself. And
Right.
that's what Job does. And so that's why I personally am completely comfortable with the conclusion that God did what he did in 6 days and then rested on the seventh and set that as a pattern for us. And I find no hint of, I'm going to ignore the Big Bang Theory or any science. I don't care about that. No, I love all that stuff because I see it as revealing the beauty of God and his elegance and his complexity. I just don't believe that the universe could have been in little stages over time and then become the complexity we have now. It had to be completed as a massive component of fully functional solar systems, stars, everything. He did in a week pull everything together and construct it. But at the end of the week, he said it was very good. It had to be completed. It had to be fully functional. And then that machine turned on and everything was working exactly the way he wanted it to be. And it was beautiful. And we've,
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I am, I understand your position and in many respects, I agree with you. The one thing I don't is I don't know what the time frame was. My view with the chiasm, the inverted chiasm, and day one corresponding to day four and so on all the way through the week, I don't think it tells us anything about how long it took God to do what he did. But that he did it is absolutely clear, and that it had nothing to do with naturalistic evolution is absolutely clear.
yeah, there's no non-intelligence involved. Yeah.
Now, as far as the age of the universe is concerned, I don't know. I know that scientists base their calculations because they try and calculate it from the Big Bang on the speed of light, but that assumes that the speed of light has always been a constant. It's definitely. I mean, both of our positions are Christian positions, and we haven't talked about the other Christian views that have been taken, including by Old Testament scholars. They're some different views taken there. But I think in the end, there are a few things that I think are essential in looking at Genesis 1. I think one is that God is the one who creates life. It doesn't emerge from non-life. God is the one who creates life. And God is the one who sets the pattern for how life reproduces. It's not nature that does it. God did that. God is the one who sets the boundaries between land and ocean, not nature. and so on and so on. I mean, I think there are details in Genesis 1 that we need to take seriously and not try and explain away because we want to accept scientific conclusions. In fact, in my position, if I'm right, God is intimately involved in what happens on other planets and in other galaxies and in other solar systems, just like he was here. He's the architect, to use your word, which I think is great. He's the architect of the entire universe, not just of what happens here on Earth. And the more we discover about Earth and how everything is fine tuned for life, it's even more staggering that there had to be an intelligence behind it. There's no way around it. It's in fact, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous to conclude, wow, look what chance did. Oh my gosh, how blind and stupid can you be? You're just deluding yourself. And that's what it is. It's a self-delusion. There's nothing rational about it. It's just an attempt to escape what the evidence clearly points to, not just kind of points to, but clearly points to. I just feel sad for scientists who won't draw the obvious conclusion from their own research. It's sad. And I pray for them, but I see no reason to agree with them. They might be right about some of the mechanisms that are involved and how things have developed over time. But we can't, I don't think we really know how old the earth is. I know you've drawn certain conclusions from Genesis about it, but from my view, I don't think we really know. And I don't think scientists really know. I think it's a good, I think because their metric, they've already admitted that their metric is not a constant. And that's the speed of light. And so how old it is, I don't know. But the intimacy of the creator in and being the architect of his creation, being the designer of his entire creation is becoming more and more obvious. And I think we need to not only accept that, but embrace it as us verifying a truth that even ancient peoples knew without all the evidence. They just looked around them and saw enough design to conclude, yeah, there's a God.
Yeah,
There's no other.
Aristotle actually ridiculed the idea of evolution, of the development of gradual stages from apes. People have been making that connection for thousands of years. Wow, there seems to be a lot of similarities to these two. What Darwin did wasn't introduce a brand new concept.
No,
He introduced the idea that, well, we can scientifically see the mechanism for that transformation. And he suggested survival of the fittest, etc. But that's fallen apart, like we talked about before.
it has.
And the mechanism itself is what he introduced that gave justification for the idea that we transformed from apes into humans, which
Well,
has been around in the time of Aristotle.
right,
They
right.
believed it too.
And the mechanism, natural selection, that he gave is obvious when you're talking about microevolution, changes within a species, but it's not obvious at all that one species evolves into another species or one kind evolves into another
No
kind. That's
evidence
not
for it.
obvious at all. That's conjecture, and that's conjecture that's been disproven.
They've sought for evidence, but don't they still call it the missing link?
But it's been scientifically disproven. And that's why, but why does Darwinism, why does it keep being taught? It's because of the power brokers in the scientific community and others who want to continue to advance the myth of natural selection, that natural selection can explain everything biologically when it can't.
Well, I would even add into that, it's trying to water us down as Christians, of
Sure.
trying to break our resolve to stand on the word of God and its authority. I think it's a movement to try to diminish what God has told us. Everything reproduces after its own kind. There's no more clear, obvious, scientifically proven statement from Genesis 1 that we could lay before the people is when God says through Moses, reproduce after their own kind. That means not static, like every animal is going to look the same. We could have tigers with various stripes, etc., or elephants with different features, but they're all within their own kind. Cattle, we can have a lot of different cattle. Dogs, we can have a lot of different dogs. That doesn't preclude that observation. That doesn't exclude it. But it's really clearly scientifically 100% verifiable. Genesis 1 got it right. Everything reproduces after its own kind. And
That's
there's
right.
no evidence that it ever does anything else. People
That's
brought,
right.
I think I said that once and a kid brought, what about a liger? It's like, okay, that's a corruption that won't reproduce.
Right.
Like donkeys and horses produce mules, that mules don't reproduce. So there's clearly a delineation that's built into the DNA, into the very fabric of our biological being.
Sure. Well, even male and female, to bring it up to a contemporary debate, you can put all the homosexuals you want on one island, put all the male homosexuals in one island, put all the female lesbians on another island, never the twain shall meet, and see how long they last. They can't reproduce. They can't. It's physically, biologically impossible for them to reproduce.
Yeah, even if from a non-Christian standpoint, even just an
Yes.
evolutionary standpoint, how did we evolve? Somehow, evolution produced the need for male and female. It's a biological reality. I'm not being rude.
Right, right. So, it's human beings also reproduce after their kind. You don't two human beings mate, they don't produce a dog. They don't produce a spider. They don't produce anything else. They produce another human being. This is the way it goes. And so I think Genesis is, in comparison to the other creation stories that you'll find in other cultures and religions, and even the so-called creation story that we have in materialistic science, when you compare the Genesis account to all those other accounts, it's crystal clear that Genesis got it right and all these others got it wrong.
Absolutely.
So I don't believe I'm being unscientific at all.
No,
I believe
no.
I believe what I've concluded fits the evidence just fine, and I'm perfectly fine with it.
I love what science reveals. I don't worship what
Oh,
science reveals. Like you
yeah,
said before, science doesn't speak, it's the scientists. And you have to disengage the worldview or recognize the worldview that's guiding the conclusions of that scientist. And we even have to be careful in today's world of how much money is involved in swaying the
yeah,
conclusions of science. We love science. God created reason and science and the laws of the universe that we spend all this time studying and going, wow, this is so cool. Instead of saying, look what God did, we kind of go, wow, it's amazing what random mindless chance produced. It's like, please throw that away.
yeah. Well, and I'm a worldviews guy, and one of the thing that I think is just fascinating is when people talk about science today, they insist that all scientists are atheists, which is false. In fact, I've found Christians who are scientists. I've found deists who are scientists. I have found panentheists who are scientists. There is even a pantheist who was a scientist. Chandra Wickramasinghe was his name, wrote a book with Fred Hoyle debunking the idea that life arose by chance.
Wow. Yeah, Fred Hoyle, the guy that discovered DNA, or one of the guys, didn't he become a Christian or a believer in God of some sort?
I think he did. I think he did.
Okay.
And Wickramasinghe did too. So he's no longer a pantheist. But when he wrote the book with Hoyle, he was a pantheist. He was not a Christian. And Hoyle was not a Christian either. But they both saw that biological life could not have risen by chance. In fact, their conclusion was, in looking at all the evidence, that the chance of biological life arising by chance would be equivalent, this is funny, would be equivalent to a junkyard by chance producing a Boeing 747.
Yeah. The very powerful winds kind of assembled that.
In other words, impossible. So, but I marvel at some of the discoveries that scientists have made. And it's some of the things that have been created technologically because of scientific discoveries and all that. But the emphasis has to be on discovery. We're discovering. what God has already done. And we put it to use, which, by the way, is what God commanded us to do, is to rule over the creation, is to, in other words, use it, put it to good use. And
Gardeners, we
we
are
often do.
governors. Yeah. We
Yeah.
were put on this earth. That's the other message, particularly Genesis 2,
Yeah.
was we were placed here to be caretakers. Yeah, we've really done a bad job of caretaking. I know, I get it. But the call on my heart is to be a caretaker, to care for each other, to serve each other. I even hate using the word love anymore because it's so corrupted. To really look out for each other, even those people that aren't in line with what I believe or anything. We're supposed to not evaluate people and serve people based upon those components. And God, because that God does that, right? He gives rain to everybody. He gives the crops of the field. He gives the animals for us to enjoy. He made all of creation to be a blessing to us and to work in our lives. And we're supposed to worship him, not the creation.
It would be like giving Rembrandt, or not giving Rembrandt any credit for his paintings, you know? In fact, even denying that he painted them.
Yeah. That's a really great painting.
Yeah. Look at these great paintings. Who did it? I don't know. There's
Who
Rembrandt. It
cares? It doesn't matter who
must
did
be
it.
a myth.
Do we really know Rembrandt existed? On Is there any historical data to back that up? Is there some historical record that not nearly as much as what proves God exists?
It's just amazing. So, I love the book of Genesis. I think it's an amazing work. And it would be fun to get in some of the genealogical issues with Genesis 5 and
'Cause
10.
that's my other argument. The
Yeah.
age of the earth is the genealogies kind of point out how long ago the creation
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
At least when Adam and Eve was created, that's the key component that would still allow potentially your understanding of Genesis to expand out. But from the point that he didn't develop them from an amoeba, from a pool of goo, through all these stages, all these bazillions of years of random chance. How could all that have happened? It couldn't have happened that as the way they describe it. That's a false story. And it only could have happened because a God who is our creator had purpose in mind for us. He had a goal in mind for us, and he created us to fulfill that purpose, and we abandoned it. That's what he's trying to draw us back to. So when salvation finally happens, when he finally says, okay, I'm done. You guys have really messed this up. You've given it a good go. Well, good try, everybody. I'm just going to come back and we're going to wipe it clean and reset it and make it new. And this is what you're supposed to be. That's a beautiful time that we look forward to.
Absolutely. No, Corey, along these lines, when you think of Genesis 1 and 2, I agree with you that the accounts are complementary. They're not conflicting. I think one of the things that struck me is on the literary side of it is you have Genesis 1 giving you the big picture and about what God has done with the earth, including creating his image bearers to populate the earth. But then when you get in Genesis 2, now it focuses really on the image bearers.
Yes.
The rest of it is the backdrop. And it's how the image bearers came to be. And we weren't coughed up by nature in any way.
And there was a relationship aspect between God and I even believe we interacted with the angels at that time. I don't believe there was this barrier we have now between the spiritual world and the physical world. We are living in a fallen world where the physical and the spiritual are separated. We're separated from God, we're separated from the spiritual world, and every now and then there's a fissure. God allows Gabriel to show up, or some other demonic force breaks through somehow and influences and affects us. And there's a spiritual world at war, which is clearly throughout Scripture as well. But I believe before the fall, we knew it all. We were experiencing it all. It wasn't just with the animals, it was with the angelic beings and everything that God created and God himself. And the saddest words in the entire Old Testament is, "Where are you?"
Yeah, I I agree with you on that. And and I think I can make a case even with using the serpent as a starting point for what you just argued. And that would be fun to pick up, in another episode
Yeah,
of
maybe.
our
Yeah, I
conversation.
think I'll
Yeah, but
reduce it down. This will probably be our longest one, but I hope people will enjoy it. We'll
yeah.
see.
Well, if you're going to go in depth in something, it takes a little bit more time.
Right, exactly. And I r- really, I understand better your position of the symbolic part and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that might bring some peace to people too. What I cannot, I'll just say this one thing, and I'm like about that. What I cannot accept is people diminishing Moses as if he were ignorant and didn't know what he was talking about. And we know better now. My dad used to say that kind of stuff, like he was a theistic evolutionist. And I hear friends of mine saying that now. It's like, okay, yeah, this is really good. I see what you mean, Piper, but I'm just going to completely dismiss it.
I agree. I agree. You said your dad's a theistic evolutionist?
Yeah,
Can you hold on just for a moment?
you bet. You bet.
It's the size of an old phone book. This is how many pages is it? It's over 1,000 pages, and it's a collection of essays, basically academic papers that are written by mostly scientists and a few philosophers until you get to the last section, which is written by Bible scholars. And so the first section is the scientific critique of theistic evolution. The second part is the philosophical critique of theistic evolution. And the last one is a biblical and theological critique of theistic
Wow.
evolution. So yeah,
Do they
yeah,
refute it or are they promoting it?
yeah, they refute it scientifically, philosophically, and theologically and biblically. They bury it. And so,
I would,
if you want
okay.
to share with your dad,
Well, my
there's
dad passed away in 2015, so
oh, okay.
yeah,
Well, this is a contemporary
he's
book.
already figured it out by now.
Yeah. This he died in when?
15.
Okay. Well, this was written in 2017. This was written in 2017. And man, it is great. I read the whole thing.
Yeah, but the thing is, this is what's always, my dad wouldn't have been convinced by it. I don't think. It makes
Well,
me
but
sad.
anybody you come across, who's a theistic evolutionist, you got to tell them about
Post
this
that.
and tell them if you read that and then you come back to me and
All
tell
right.
me that you think theistic evolution is still true.
Okay. All right.
It's a
That out
great,
there.
great refutation. So yeah. Well, and it's a good test. Are they really willing to consider the possibility that they're wrong? Because here is a pretty large group of scholars from the scientific community, philosophical community, and theological and biblical community, all arguing that theistic evolution is false.
Yeah, I would love to read that. Well, yeah, I'll add it to my list. God bless.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, thank you, sir. It's always good.
Well, that's all for this episode of Let's Talk. Bill Watkins and I, Corey Piper, thank you for joining us. We started our conversations together over 20 years ago in the hallway of a school, and we've never stopped talking. We're happy that you're going to be joining us. No sermons, just honest discussions. If this sparks something in you, hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. Also, share this with a friend who's wrestling with the same questions. We're all in this together. And please drop a 5-star review if we're helping you think more deeply. It fuels the algorithm and spreads the dialogue. Until next time, keep reasoning, keep growing. See you soon.